Hey everyone, welcome back to 51%'s Crypto Research Podcast. Today in the podcast, I had the Whiteblock team on to discuss their widely circulated EOS report titled EOS in Architectural Performance and Economic Analysis. We're going to link to the paper in the show notes. I'm joined today by Zach Cole, the CTO of Whiteblock, Nate Blakely, a systems developer at Whiteblock, and Daniel Choi, a blockchain developer at Whiteblock. Zach and Nate are listed as co-authors of the EOS report. We discussed the serious issues the team unearthed after 3 months and thousands of hours analyzing EOS. Our conversation spans why EOS can't hit thousands of transactions per second, the issues with cartels, the blacklist, the problems with the voting, and more. As an aside, 51% is thrilled to expand its reach through its new retail plan. For less than 70 cents a day, anyone can access our entire content library of extensive crypto research. Visit 51pct.io to see our latest research reports, including our new report on Ethereum Serenity upgrade, which was just released. Sign up on 51pct.io before prices go up. With that, here's my conversation with the Whiteblock team. Hey everyone, welcome back to the podcast. Today in the podcast, I have Zach Cole, Nate Blakely, and Daniel Choi, all from the Whiteblock team. I will let them introduce themselves, but we're here to discuss their EOS report titled EOS in Architectural Performance and Economic Analysis. It was widely received or widely circulated and well received, I believe, by the community, and I really enjoyed it. And we're going to link to it in the show notes. But with that, I guess I'll start with you, Zach. Everybody could just introduce themselves. That'd be great.
Yeah. Hey, I'm Zach. CTO of Whiteblock.
I'm Nate. I'm the backend engineer / developer at Whiteblock.
Awesome. And Daniel, how about yourself?
Hey, Daniel, blockchain developer here at Whiteblock.
Awesome. So I guess, let's just start with Whiteblock itself. I mean, who are you guys and what do you do?
Yeah, so we started I started working on this project on my own like about a year ago, and kind of took some time to convince people that blockchain was worth checking out. We were originally part of a software and network testing company called Apposite. I think we started actually getting the ball rolling on the company Whiteblock itself around January or so, and we started developing the actual product. I think Daniel was probably the first guy to work with me, and ever since then we've just been testing different blockchain platforms. We've developed a software as a service to offer our testing framework for end users, so people can sign up on a subscription base to use our framework and testing environment to run their own tests on smart contracts or protocols, whatever. So we're getting ready to release that here in a couple weeks.
That's awesome. So basically, you guys test every blockchain platform.
Yeah, we're blockchain agnostic, so we're not really tied to any one particular blockchain.
Got it. Okay, so the EOS report that you guys put out, that's kind of the first taste of what you guys are going to do. You guys plan to do this on for other chains?
Oh yeah, we've already done a lot. You can actually check out some of our previous work on our website and our Medium. This is the first one. This is the biggest one we've done, obviously, so it got a little bit more attention, but we've run these same tests on Hyperledger, Syscoin, Ethereum, just whatever platform we could work with at the time. So
that's awesome. That's interesting. I mean, you guys are doing, obviously from the report, you guys are going well into the mechanics of the blockchains themselves.
Yeah. We have to kind of understand exactly how it works in order to figure out how to break it and, run the relevant performance tests.
That's interesting. So, why don't one of you just give us an overview of EOS so the listeners know, what we're talking about if they're not familiar with the EOS blockchain?
Yeah, so EOS is similar to something like a masternode system, except it's highly centralized and closed. So with traditional masternode systems like Dash, for instance, anybody can join as a validator. So what EOS does is they sacrifice security and decentralization in order to achieve a higher performance and higher transactional throughput. And the only way that they can readily accommodate for that is by ensuring that that it's a very closed, centralized, and controlled network between the block producers, and that allows them to somewhat accommodate for the shortcomings that result from not having as much security and having a highly centralized network.
That's interesting. So I think it makes sense to go through your report kind of in order. So, instead of jumping around. So, let's start with your analysis of Eos's architecture. I guess just give us your overview of the Eos architecture and then we could go into your analysis of it afterwards.
Sure. Yeah. So, all of the account structure and everything is essentially in order for a user to generate a transaction or to transact with another user within the network, they have to go through the block producer as an intermediary. The block producer itself offsets all of that computational overhead from the user and processes the transactions on their behalf. So that's not really something that's traditional in blockchain. But that's kind of like the bulk of it right there. And the consensus is really surrounds the process of delegating and voting for those block producers in order to get them into office. So that's really what the focal point of the consensus mechanism is.
Got it. So, what is, I guess, after looking at the architecture of EOS, I'm not sure whether it's worth, diving into the components that you guys discuss or whether it's worth just jumping to your analysis and what you found. I mean, what makes the most sense in your mind when discussing this?
Well, I think that a lot of those details are just too technical for to warrant like a casual conversation.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. So, I mean, I guess after looking at the architecture of EOS, what was your end result, or what did you find?
Well, I think that ultimately the benefit that Eos provides isn't really unique to their system. I think that it's not really much different than a traditional client server architecture in like a cloud environment using some sort of payment processing gateway like Stripe or something like that, because it's not censorship resistant and it's highly centralized. So what's the point and what's the benefit in using Eos? And these are questions that I'm asking the Eos community, because I'm not trying to like body slam them or anything. I'm just trying to be objective in our analysis. So those are legit questions. Like, are they like, what is the benefit? I don't understand,
Yeah, that makes sense. So, I mean, basically EOS came around, like you said, to offer higher throughput at the cost of decentralization. They have 21 nodes versus Ethereum, which has something like 17,000 nodes, but Ethereum could only process, 5 or 10 transactions per second. I guess the question for you guys is, how decentralized does 21 nodes actually mean? Like, do you guys feel that that's like resistant to people changing the network, or do you just think that 21 nodes isn't enough? Because I don't know if we've decided if 21 or 17,000 is the right number.
I'd say that 21 is definitely not the right number. And I mean, if you look at it from a perspective of like Byzantine fault tolerance, I don't even think that Eos presents Byzantine fault tolerance. And I'm going to get a lot of argument and backlash for saying something like that. But I don't think that a lot of people have an essential understanding for these concepts in, computer science.
Yeah, Zach, what is, just for people who aren't aware, what is Byzantine fault tolerance and why does EOS not have it?
Well, I think what the whole point of Byzantine fault tolerance is to, one, present resilience to absence of particular components within the network, and two, a mechanism to allow all of these disparate nodes to agree on a particular state. So that's what I would say would be the important definitions of Byzantine fault tolerance and what they functionally provide and what it functionally provides. So
no, that's interesting. So, I mean, you guys clearly, did take issue with kind of like the key points of the EOS system overall. I mean, did you guys see any of these benefits that are shared around in real time? I mean, did you guys actually see like thousands of transactions per second or the ability to even do that?
No. So one thing that's important to note is we like, so one of the big lashes, like the kind of the backfired front, not backfired, but a lot of complaints from the EOS camp is like, oh, well, why does it say that we got 4,000 transactions per second this one time on the network if we weren't capable of 4,000 transactions per second? And also I'd like to note that this time last year, they claimed 1 million transactions per second. About 6 months ago, they were claiming 100,000 transactions per second. Then a few months ago, it was 50,000 transactions per second. Now everyone's settling on 4,000 transactions per second. So we were able to achieve 4,000 transaction per second throughput under very, very specific conditions. And that was when the block producers themselves and the accounts, the client that was conducting the transactions were either on the same machine or very, very close to one another within the same local area network. That was the only time we were able to see transactional throughput in those numbers. And then if you look on the mainnet, on the EOS mainnet, you can see that the instance in which they presented those throughput, those numbers and that throughput number, they were all empty transactions. There were no transactions occurring. All they were just bare transactions with very little associated metadata that were all signed "We Love BM," which is not only a colloquialism for bowel movement, but also Byte Master, which is Dan Larimer's nickname. So we can only assume that these same conditions that presented that displayed the throughput were conducted in-house by EOS, by either the block producers or Dan Larimer himself, in order to stress test the network, because they've only achieved 4,000 transactions per second at one time. If this were like a rule, why have they not presented those same numbers at all? Because if you go to the EOS Network Explorer or the monitor, I mean, it looks like their average throughput is exactly what we determined it would be, between 50 and a max of 250 transactions per second.
That's super interesting. So, I mean, basically I guess another question for you is what's the disparity between your tests and, real life, a real life layout of the EOS network? Like, you guys basically set up a perfect system? And I'm just trying to figure out, I mean, if you achieved 4,000 transactions per second under a perfect setting, what are they actually achieving right now?
Well, I don't think that they're achieving anything more than 50 to 250 transactions per second. And I would welcome anyone to challenge me and prove me wrong. But we've done a lot of work and our system is accurate. And I have a lot of confidence in our abilities. And most of my time was spent ensuring that our math was right. I'm real OCD about stuff like that. Like we worked hundreds of hours on this, like thousands of hours. So
that's insane. But I mean, how can you argue to use, if you're using a centralized blockchain, you want thousands of transactions per second. I mean, that should be a given, right?
Yes.
Geez. So, I mean, I guess another question for you is, what were the main problems when you were looking into your report? I mean, or diving into your research?
Probably their code base. It was total spaghetti code and none of it made sense. And it looked like 50 people were responsible for writing this code. And during the process of writing the code, none of those 50 people communicated with one another, were even aware of each other's existence.
Wow.
So it was really bad. And Nate, please comment on this for me, because Nate did a lot of this stuff with me, and Daniel too. It was just a real shit show. Nate and Daniel, what was it like?
It was ridiculous.
There's just a lot of unused code in there, which made it really confusing. Like a lot of the functions in there were just not usable to begin with, and also just sitting there, which obviously also would have performance effects on their code base, but made reviewing it a very painful process.
Yeah.
So where do you guys? Sorry, Daniel, go ahead.
Even their documentation, they kind of left it empty and filled most of them with lorem ipsum, and it's pretty much non-existent documentation.
Yeah. So in order to figure out what the expected output for the RPC calls were, because their documentation was gibberish, we had to run it through Wireshark to packet sniff these commands in order to extract the expected output, and we had to go through the work of defining them on our own.
So guys, compare this for the listeners. I mean, how easy is it to view Ethereum's code base or Bitcoin's code base versus viewing EOS's code base?
All right, Bitcoin is pretty crazy too, but it's like organized and it makes sense. It's just huge. Ethereum is written in Go, so I think this is going to be a little more biased because I primarily write my code in Go. I think it's just much cleaner and more modular.
Got it. So, I mean, but if you guys had such issues just getting the code base, how would a developer handle these issues? Like,
well, they don't really. The developers for EOS don't really necessarily have to interface with the source code itself because they have a lot of. So the way that it functions is like it's all dictated by smart contracts. So everything, any sort of interaction you need to make with the primary blockchain is just going to be through smart contracts. So,
got it. That's interesting. So who is the party that's supposed to, organize all this? Is this like Block One's?
No. What happened was Block One raised like $4 billion, and then they released like this half-assed product, and they're like, oh, it's up to the community to finish it now, and that doesn't make any sense to me. So now it's up to the community to figure out how they want to use it. That's weird. That's like buying a Tesla and then just getting a box full of parts, and then Elon Musk is like, all right, it's up to you to finish building this Tesla.
That's interesting. So, I've always been of the argument that, having a bunch of money doesn't actually solve any issues because, as everyone knows, you can't solve product market fit by throwing money at things. But I just find it weird that EOS raised $4 billion and they're having so many issues, whereas Ethereum grants out like 10 or 20 grand to a project, and these projects are just successful.
Prismatic Labs just got $500,000 from the Ethereum Foundation. And I mean, I think the Ethereum community is pretty great and they have their shit together. I'm not really like an Ethereum fanboy. I'm just going to use whatever, as a developer, I'm going to use whatever is the easiest and most convenient for me that presents the best user experience.
Interesting. So, I mean, the user experience though for the developers is also a big deal because if you're not building on EOS, there's not going to be any use cases for the consumers. Right. How hard is it to build on EOS, or did you guys look at this compared to other platforms?
Yeah, I mean, it's fairly difficult. I wanted to go to we were going to go mentor at the EOS hackathon, but we received personal uninvitations from Block One. They said they pretty much to fuck off and whatever. But
something which I'd like to bring up because I just saw it right now. Two of the block producers on EOS, if you look at their basically their source of truth, the EOS network monitor, two of the block producers right now are like 600,000 blocks behind the rest, which just shows the instability of the system if you want to look at it right now.
Yeah, I just find it so weird. I mean, the point of having a centralized blockchain is to have high performance and not have these issues. I mean, right. My point is, if we were in a perfect world and EOS worked and there was, let's say, 1 million transactions per second on 21 nodes, I mean, you would still have problems with cartels and vote buying and stuff like that. But they can't even get to that point, is what you guys are saying.
Yeah, exactly. So they're not able to present anything that was claimed. And generally, like if this were like a truly open source project, I wouldn't be nearly as critical, right? Because it's an open source project, it's driven by a community. It's hard to try to get a lot of that stuff going and like move a lot of those initiatives along. But I mean, the fact of the matter is they raised $4 billion, and the product they released is worth $400. Like it's not really like a $4 billion product, and it's not presenting $4 billion worth of value to the world.
That's interesting. So what do you guys, going back to the release of EOS, I mean, they had a bunch of problems on getting token holders to vote for block producers. And they also had an issue with their constitution. Yeah, what do you guys feel about those things?
Well, this is the same issue that happened with BitShares. I mean, I don't know if a lot of people are new in the space, but I mean, if you recall BitShares, it was the exact same model. In fact, to compare it, we went and tried to find the white paper just to make sure, which they hid from the internet. We had to use the Wayback Machine to try to get the original BitShares white paper. And when you compare side by side the BitShares white paper to the EOS white paper, they're the exact same thing. They just changed some of the verbiage and the terminology. So
for those who are unaware, what was just give an overview of BitShares?
Yeah, so BitShares was Dan Larimer's original project that he presented, which presents the exact same use case. It's like a number of validators that are producing blocks, and it's based on voting, and it kind of incorporates like the worst parts of a bank with the shittiest parts of a democracy. So the reason it failed is that nobody gave a shit to vote. Nobody wanted to vote. You can't incentivize people to vote when they don't have any reason to do so. Everyone, and then that means that the only people that are going to vote are those who are voting in their own self-interest, which are generally block producers themselves or their cronies or whoever they are in that cartel.
Yeah, that's interesting. So going back to recent events with EOS, I mean, do you guys? I don't know if they figured out their constitution yet, but that always was a little weird to me because they're it can't be enforced by code. So what's your take on the EOS Constitution? And do you guys think that they'll figure this out? And give an overview of it.
So the whole point to me, one of the big benefits and the points of a blockchain is that we're able to accommodate for human error. We're able to accommodate with that through code. That's the whole thing of Byzantine fault tolerance and distributed consensus. So if we're relying more and more on human input in order to provide a functional system, that's just not going to work, and it's not going to work any better than anything else that's already available.
That's interesting. So let's switch over to the cartels and vote buying issue. I think this was a problem a few weeks ago where some thought that block producers were bribing voters to vote for them or forming cartels. Do you think that what's your take on this? Give an overview of it. And do you think that this could ever be solved in the future?
I don't think it could ever be solved because I don't think voting works well. I don't believe in the American voting system, let alone some sort of weird futuristic cyber voting mechanism. Just because computers are involved doesn't mean it's any more trustworthy. But yeah, there's nothing that prevents the block producers from creating proxy accounts that allow them to vote for themselves. There's nothing that ensures that they're not voting for each other. And also, like when it comes to things like blacklisting and consensus, that's all seems to be something that's like an opt-in feature. And Daniel can expand more on this. He talked about he did a lot of the tests for the voting mechanisms themselves. If you want to,
Daniel, please chime in. We're definitely interested in that.
Yeah, sure. So there's one to start off with the blacklist, or to continue off on that. It's not mandated for these block producers to keep an updated blacklist. So there's no reason for, let's say one of the block producers, there's actually some sort of scandal that happened where one of the block producers didn't update their blacklist and they had to freeze their account, and a whole bunch of things with, there's like a bunch of backlash with that block producer and a lot of unforeseen consequences, I guess. But there's no enforcement for these block producers to even have a blacklist. And of course, they might be voted out, they might retaliate, but still there's no reinforcement by code. And it's just kind of sketchy that all of these block producers kind of have their own sovereignty apart from the community.
So Daniel, if every block producer has their own blacklist, and I'm assuming this is a blacklist to blacklist accounts, or is this a blacklist to like cancel out, holdings in people's accounts? What exactly is the blacklist?
It'll basically completely freeze an account, so they can't make any transactions, they can't pull out any money, they can't vote, they can't send any transactions.
So so you're saying that every block producer has their own blacklist and they don't sync them up?
Well, they upload it and they expect other block producers to update theirs, but this isn't enforced.
Yeah.
Wow. So, I mean, the only way for them to agree on a blacklist, though, is to all talk to each other, right? And then we kind of get the problem of centralization again.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so like it's literally just a TXT file. They have to upload like a TXT file, and
Well, it's a config file, but yeah, it's pretty much
like a markdown file.
Yeah.
So they like everybody. So that's another issue is that the block producer network itself assumes a certain degree of trust between the block producers. There's no real algorithmic enforcement to ensure that these block producers are behaving the way that they should.
Got it. So can you guys, just for the listeners, compare this to Ethereum and if they have a blacklist? I don't think they do, or how that would work in Ethereum's network?
Well, so within Ethereum, there's tens of thousands of validating nodes. So if like a group of 21 or a small group tried to perform as bad actors, they're not going to be able to, because the rest of the network is going to keep them in check because it's such a distributed network itself, and anybody can take part as one of those validators.
Interesting. All right, that makes a lot of sense. So you guys, let's play devil's advocate here. Let's say that EOS came out with a new constitution and it made sense. What you guys are saying is that there's no way, as good as they can write it, it will never be enforced by code.
Yeah, right, exactly. Which is just a cause of concern for me as a developer, as a computer scientist.
Got it. That's interesting. So let's go on to your actual paper. I want to just take out some of the key points you guys landed on, or just talk about some of the interesting topics, and feel free to chime in if I missed any. But one of the ones I really did like is that you guys argued that the EOS accounts are not composed of public and private key pairs, and this is
no, they are composed of public private key pairs. So there's just no cryptographic mechanism that functions in relation to state validation. So public private key pairs are that's not really something that's necessarily unique to blockchain. So they do use the same public private key mechanism that Bitcoin uses, which is SEC P256K. I don't know if that was.
I guess just what's the difference between, you guys kind of argued that the state transitions in EOS are different because they're not cryptographically verified. I might be misunderstanding that, but any explanation there would be interesting.
Yeah. So there's they don't really, the Merkle function doesn't really relate to state. It's just acts something as a nonce for blocks. So and then further cryptographic enforcement of state transition isn't really enforced cryptographically. It seems like they don't really care about state of accounts. What their cryptography, quote unquote, focuses on is ensuring that these accounts are paying for their CPU and their RAM and their computational resources that are used in the network. As far as the account balance and everything else is concerned, they don't really give a shit about that. They're it's kind of like a landlord that only cares that you're paying the rent. He doesn't really care about whether or not you're getting hot, your air conditioning is working, right? So they just care that you're paying that rent.
Interesting. That's interesting. So Nate and Daniel, I know you guys probably dove into the state management parts of the paper most likely, but I'd love to get an overview on the resources in EOS, the bandwidth and log, the computation, and then the RAM, and then we could discuss after that the problems with it. So if you guys give an overview of the resources on EOS, that would be great.
All right, sure. So basically, according to their model, they model it after a marketplace because bandwidth, CPU usage, and RAM are limited resources. You can only use so much. So for CPU usage, I believe the current unit is just time per day. And basically, in order to get anything done, you need to stake a certain amount of EOS. And that stake can go towards either RAM bandwidth or CPU usage. And once you have that stake, that basically allocates that resources to yourself, and you can either buy more or sell it. So it's simply just like a marketplace.
So if I buy 1% of EOS tokens, I'm supposed to control 1% of the compute, but supposedly this doesn't apply to RAM, I think?
That I'm not 100% sure on. Maybe Zach knows.
I don't think that's necessarily true. I mean, you're able to stake and purchase RAM, and then you can resell it. But I don't think that controlling 1% of the tokens necessarily correlates to 1% of the RAM or the computational resources necessarily. If you choose to do that, then you can. But also because it implements a marketplace, just because you're buying, you're not always buying RAM and computational resources directly from the block producer. So it kind of sets out something like kind of like a Ponzi scheme, right? Like, I'm buying this RAM, I'm going to resell it to you at a higher price, and that's how it works. So it doesn't necessarily, it's not really a 1-to-1 ratio mapping.
Got it. I mean, that's a major issue though, right? Because I mean, one of the key points of EOS is that their selling point that the percentage of tokens you buy grants you a percentage of the network, right?
Right. Yeah. But they don't, but another thing that they're presenting is like early adopters are able to purchase all of those resources and control them before anybody else comes on. Right. And when those new users start to adopt the EOS network, they're forced to purchase those resources from those other users rather than directly from the network itself. So that means that these other users that were around before kind of offer like a paywall, right? And they're able to determine whatever the cost is going to be.
Got it. That's interesting. So, tied to that, one of EOS's selling points is that, there's free transaction fees. And to be honest, I mean, that sounds like a great user experience. Users don't have to go through the process of paying transaction fees, but that's hidden in inflation. How do you guys feel about this scenario?
Well, one thing is like gas fees are there to protect the user. They're like, in
Ethereum.
Yeah, right. So like transaction fees are there to protect the user from like DOSing or like Sybil attacks, right? So how do they accommodate for that in EOS? They don't really. There's no real actual. So what should work is they have rate limits, right? But their current iteration of their code doesn't enforce rate limiting. It's actually like commented out and it says to do enforce rate limiting. So that's not something that's present in the network right now.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow,
So,
that's interesting. So basically what you guys are saying is Ethereum has their gas limits, which kind of protect users from spam, but EOS doesn't have this.
right. Yeah. So, and also the cost, it's not really free transactions either. So like the cost of the dApp and interacting with that dApp is offset to the dApp developers themselves. So now as a dApp developer, I have to pay on behalf of my users. So that puts the cost of the development onto me as a developer. I'm not going to do that. I don't think that a lot of people are going to want to do that. And then in order to accommodate for that, then I have to charge for my dApp. And that creates another layer and another abstraction, like an additional marketplace that I don't think is very healthy for the space.
That's interesting. So let's move on to your last point in your paper, the economic systems analysis. And let's talk about the context of the EOS token. I guess let's go into, we already talked about the initial token sale where they raised $4 billion. But let's go to the distribution of tokens across accounts. Are tokens actually distributed or not?
What do you mean? Are they distributed? Are they like fairly and like?
Yeah, like do the top 10 or 100 or 1,000 accounts control the majority of the supply?
I think everybody knows that there's like a huge disparation between the distribution of the tokens. I mean, everyone's well aware that Block 1 controls a majority of the tokens, right?
Yeah, of course. No, that's a key point. I mean, I knew it. I just don't know if everyone else.
Yeah. Like Block 1 themselves controls a huge portion of the tokens in the network. So if they wanted to, they could, initiate some sort of coup. There's nothing preventing them from doing that.
Got it. So basically, in all fairness, we're kind of hoping that Block 1 doesn't take actions that are negative to the network. I mean, I don't know if they have since.
So what people are going to say is like, oh, well, why would they act against like their own investment, But that's not really the thing here. It's not. No one cares about whether or not they would act against it. The fact is that they can. And how much do you trust, right? So this is supposed to be a trustless system that eliminates the need for any sort of third party or middleman or intermediary when communicating between individuals, right? So now I have to assume a certain degree of inherent trust when I'm operating within the system. So does that really solve the initial problem?
That's a really good point. So, moving on with the token, I mean, what is the utility of the EOS token? I mean, I know it's voting for block producers. I think it's also the fees in the RAM market.
Yeah, it's the RAM market. So they're creating this huge, like, weird market to like purchase computational resources, which which kind of makes sense to a certain degree, but the way that it's implemented just doesn't seem like something that's secure or deterministic, right? So just doesn't. I just don't understand what they're doing. Essentially, is kind of just like I can go onto AWS and pay for that computational resources, right? So
that's interesting. So how close do you guys? I mean, you guys are developers. If you guys are building a platform, let's say you don't have the option of using, you have the option of using EOS or the cloud providers like AWS or Microsoft Azure. Which would you pick and why?
Well, I'd probably go with. I mean, we do a lot of building on Google Cloud, so I'd go with Google Cloud over EOS, obviously. I mean, because it's a system that works. I
just have arguments like if I think of everything on a sliding scale where we go from one node to 20,000, I just feel like EOS is so close to the cloud providers, but the cloud providers could also offer. I don't know if you guys got 4,000 transactions per second. I think AWS can go up to 55,000 or something, and it sounds like you wouldn't have all these issues.
I mean, I think that AWS is capable of like 14 flops, like floating point operations per second. So, I mean, I'm not sure what that would translate into as far as transactions are concerned necessarily. That would probably depend on the transaction structure. But,
that's a good point.
But it would be pretty high. But also, I don't really care about transactions per second. I didn't get into blockchain because I was like, oh wow, I can get more transactions per second. I got into blockchain because I care about decentralization and immutability, and I care about censorship resistance, right? So that's what drew me into blockchain initially. I was like, oh, it's an alternative structure that can help make the world a better place and more decentralized and allow for self-sovereignty.
No, that's a good point. I had Miles Snyder on a podcast on one of my first episodes, and I got to be honest. I mean, I really like what Miles is trying to do because he's trying to, educate the community, and he's kind of taking a lead there.
Yeah.
I mean, I think he definitely stands out in the EOS community. Full disclosure, I don't own any EOS, but what's your guys' take on like the future of EOS? I mean, a lot of people are saying that we really just need education in EOS. I mean, do you think that that's actually going to solve anything?
I don't know. I think that they need to re-architect the entire system if they want to actually stick around. I mean, the amount of money they raise, they can only take so far. I think that they need to present something that's of unique value, and I think that they need to be a little less centralized, and a lot needs to change. But I don't think that it's going to I don't think it's dead or anything. I don't think it'll die, maybe not within the next year. I don't know. But I think that they just need to just really take a look at
we have to think in extremes here, though. I mean, if they had to rebuild their entire system, it would probably look something that's more decentralized and more enforced by code. And that would also be a very timely and hard process. I mean, it sounds to me like that's impossible.
In that case as well, if they did account for a lot of these issues, then the resulting system would look not much different than something like Dash or Syscoin or one of the masternode systems that already exists.
That's a good point. And, I just want to rattle off some key points and see what you guys think. But, EOS has distributed proof of stake, which is basically, like we talk about, where coin holders select block producers, they delegate their votes, who then validate the transactions. Ethereum doesn't have this. They're a proof of work. Do you think that their approach to consensus with distributed proof or delegated proof of stake is interesting, or do you think that they just messed it up?
I think that, for all intents and purposes, practically, it's like half of a consensus algorithm, because consensus essentially stops once those block producers are voted into office, and between those block producers, there's very little additional consensus involved. That's algorithmically enforced, and that can be demonstrated through our tests in which we altered the blacklist, right? So there's nothing that forces any of those block producers to have a certain blacklist. Also, we altered the source code on one block producer to randomly, arbitrarily reject transactions. Those transactions were rejected. They weren't sent back to, they weren't broadcast to other block producers. They were just sent back to the user. The user would then have to submit a whole new transaction in order to get that transaction through. So that just goes to show that there's very little consensus among the block producers themselves. And I think that getting the block producers in office, that's only half the battle. Like once they're in, I want to make sure that there's additional consensus and there's some sort of mechanism that ensures that they're operating in accordance to, the vision of the system.
That's super interesting. So, a lot of people are looking at Ethereum Serenity and they're getting really excited about it because they're keeping security on layer 1, but they're getting layer 1 security via decentralization, and they're getting scale via layer 2 with Plasma. And they're scaling on layer 1 with sharding. But my thought process here is that Ethereum is growing in a way that they're saving decentralization and then solving scale the next level up through updates. But EOS is kind of backwards in the sense that supposedly they have scale, but they would need to get more decentralized. Do you think that over time that they can achieve higher decentralization in the way that Ethereum's trying to innovate and get scale?
Sure, I think they could, but I think that by the time they figure that out, and also they're pretty stubborn, it seems like. Yeah, and also to note, like we ran all these same tests on Ethereum, and we pointed out their performance and their security flaws, but the Ethereum community didn't respond by throwing ad hominem attacks or straw man attacks at us. They were like, hey, this is great research, continue to work with us. And that's why we continue to work with Ethereum, because they were receptive to our research. And they're applying that to the new iterations of Ethereum. So the way that EOS has responded is by saying, oh, this is wrong. EOS is great. There's nothing wrong with the system.
Yeah, no, one of the things I do like about open communities is that they're very open, open in the sense that culturally they're very open to what's wrong with the systems, and they take the proactive approach in solving it. You've seen that through Vitalik, you've seen that through Vlad. And you've also seen that in other leaders like Will Warren at 0x and the MakerDAO team even.
Yeah.
It sounds like EOS needs like a legitimate leader here, but even that would probably cause a problem.
Right. Yeah. So, it just seems like a pretty messy situation. Yeah.
Yeah, that's good. So let's say, let's think about like a perfect golden world where, you guys are building on EOS. I know you don't want to, but let's say you're building on EOS and you have Block One's $4 billion. What would you change or what would you build to improve the system?
I would implement a cryptographic system that allows the block producers themselves to operate as transparent servers, which will allow them to pretty much be held accountable to the community by saying like this is the so one thing that I reference is like Hal Finney's original concept of the transparent server. It's like there's cryptographic proof that shows that these block producers are running the software that they claim to be running, right? So we don't have anything like that in EOS. And also I would make the barrier to entry lower for block producers themselves. Hold on, let me see. I actually put together some notes about this.
No, take your time.
So block producers should act as transparent servers. If they don't want to do that, then the identities associated with like the top accounts that comprise like over 67% of the EOS tokens should be made publicly available. If they don't want to do that, then the ability to act as a block producer should be made available to anyone from the public, like in an algorithmically enforceable manner, right? That delegates that function like appropriately. And that would kind of eliminate a large need for the token itself,
that's interesting.
Because if anybody could do it, and it was algorithmically enforceable, then there wouldn't be as much need for the token.
Yeah, that's a good point. And if you don't have a need for a token, then that has a whole can of worms of issues, right?
Right. Yeah. So I do think that, but don't get me wrong. Like I think some of the things that they're doing are kind of innovative, like the use of WASM for smart contracts. I think that's pretty good because
can you explain the difference for the listeners?
Yeah, so like with WASM, you're just WebAssembly. So any language that can compile through LLVM can be made into a smart contract. So that means I can write my smart contract C++. I can write it in Go. I can write it in whatever language I'm comfortable with, as long as it's able to be, compiled through LLVM. So
got it. So Ethereum's kind of moving that way too, right? With EWASM, or is that different?
Yeah, they're moving that way with EWASM, but that's something that's not implemented yet. Like EOS has that right now, so that is a plus for them, right?
That's a good point. So, your report was obviously super technical. It was obviously a great read. For those who aren't computer scientists or developers, they could definitely read the analysis sections and get your takeaways. But I want to move on to something that wasn't in the report, unless I missed it. I want to just go into the developer communities and what's going on there. Ethereum seems to have a thriving developer community with 2,000 dApps, 1 million truffle downloads. DEFCON 4 just happened.
Yeah.
How is the EOS culture and developer community, and what do you guys see there, if anything?
It's been pretty hostile, honestly. A lot of people, it seems very emotionally driven. Like a lot of people are like we've gotten death threats, like seriously.
Yeah.
But like we've gotten death threats from like EOS people.
Well, that's how you know you're doing something right?
Yeah, I guess so. It's been annoying. It's like another thing to note is like analysis like this it's not a beauty contest. We're not here to point out what's good about a system. Like we're like the reason we test is to point out what's ugly, because how do you improve if you don't know what you're doing wrong, right? And how do you and also how do you improve if you can't accept that you're doing something wrong, And overwhelmingly, like my experience with the EOS development community has been pretty lackluster. And then people accuse us of being Ethereum fanboys, whatever. I've been in blockchain since 2012. If you consider yourself a blockchain developer and you weren't building on Ethereum, then you don't know enough about blockchain to really have a valid opinion.
That's a good point.
Like everybody that's around right now started on Ethereum because that's all there was. There were some other alternatives, but nothing close to what Ethereum was able to do.
That's interesting. So, more on that point, I feel like EOS kind of obviously attracted $4 billion because they were targeting, retail investors and consumers on Twitter and forums, et cetera. But in reality, the people you want to target is the developers because they're the ones that are actually building on the platform, right?
Exactly. Yeah. So
that's an issue. So, do you guys see any problems with, Ethereum's rolling out Serenity. There's a lot in there. I'm going to release a report on Serenity soon and what that means. But do you guys see an issue where Serenity will take longer than, the 2 or 3 years set out, and that could give time for EOS to improve its platform and gain developer mindshare? Or do you not see that?
Yeah, no, definitely. That could be something that's entirely possible. I'm not none of us are Ethereum people. We're not EOS people. We're blockchain people. We want to make sure that blockchain sticks around, whether it's EOS, whether it's Ethereum, whether it's any one of these other systems. Like, I don't care what it is, as long as it works and as long as it functions and provides that niche use case, and it's something that's stable, that lasts. Like, that's all we care about. And I do see some essential issues with proof of stake just on its own, right? I feel like we're not necessarily at the point where proof of stake is entirely viable enough to replace proof of work. And don't get me wrong, I think proof of work consumes it's not very efficient, right? I think that we can all agree on that, but it's the best we have right now. So until we have something better, I think that proof of stake is going to have to function as something as a layer 2 solution that where proof of work provides that settlement.
No, it's interesting. It's worth getting into it. If you want to talk about it, but we already have proof of stake or delegated or liquid proof of stake in Tezos, and it seems to be working.
Yeah, we haven't looked into that yet, but I'm just highly dubious of anything proof of stake right now, just based off of what we've seen from EOS and what we've seen in other systems. Like, the best thing that I've seen is what Syscoin does, and that's where they implement proof of stake as a secondary layer, and if anything goes wrong, it defaults to proof of work. So it reduces reliance on proof of work, but we still have that mathematical enforceability that proof of work provides under worst case scenarios.
Got it. So if you guys had to take just the devil's advocate view, and let's say proof of stake doesn't work, is that bullish for proof of work coins like Bitcoin and those that aren't trying to make this transition?
Probably, yeah. Yeah, definitely, I'd say. I don't know if that, I can't objectively say that that'll be the case. I really think that there's some great minds driving these implementations, and I have confidence that we'll be able to figure out these problems and identify them and build better systems. But as far as the timeline is concerned, I don't know how immediate those are going to be implemented.
Got it. That's interesting. And just a few more topics I want to discuss on your paper. You guys talked about that EOS doesn't offer finality. Can you describe what finality is and how it works in EOS?
Yeah, so finality is like the act of making something final, right? Something it becomes immutable. It can no longer be reverted. So that's a big important concept, right? But the very structure and the architecture of the EOS database is one of the defining characteristics is the ability to indefinitely roll back on state. That's what's in the definition on their GitHub. So I don't think that that's immutable at all. I mean, block producers can revert state. They can revert it. We've seen it happen recently in the news with this whole arbitration committee, and they can't say that it doesn't work like that. And then people will bring up the DAO, right? And they'll say, well, Ethereum did it with the DAO, and that's untrue. Like there was no rollback on the DAO. Like I was there. I lost a lot of money on the DAO. Like I know exactly what's happening. So it was a hard fork. We didn't actually revert state at all. It's like we copied this and we created an entirely new blockchain. People that wanted to stay on the existing blockchain are still around. That's Ethereum Classic. And this is the new Ethereum. This has the original state. There wasn't a change. There wasn't a reversion, right?
Yeah, that's a good point. That was a hard fork, and now we have two separate. And people argue, which is the real Ethereum? Is it Ethereum Classic or Ethereum?
Whichever one you decide it is, it doesn't matter.
That's a good point.
We're not rolling back changes. They can literally revert a change. So that means that once something is committed to the ledger, it cannot be undone. That's one of the defining characteristics of blockchain. I think everybody can agree on that.
But I mean, just devil's advocate, Ethereum doesn't even have finality, right? It has mathematical finality.
It's probabilistic finality because proof of work doesn't ever actually offer complete finality. It just becomes statistically more unlikely that as time passes and more blocks are added to the chain that there's ever going to be the need to roll back on that. Yeah.
Got it. Interesting. But the point will always come back to you only have to convince 15 or 21 people on EOS to change.
Exactly. Yeah. So really, you don't even need to do that. And if you're a bad actor and you want to create a deadlock in the network, let's say that I'm a block producer. I only need to convince 6 other block producers to vote in whichever way I want, and we can prevent certain articles from being passed or whatever. So we can control that network with very much lower.
So why would financial applications seem like the highest value use case to me? Other than data, but we're seeing the fintech world kind of evolve on Ethereum with MakerDAO and Dharma and a lot of other use cases that are storing real value of money. If you're building a financial application, I feel like a developer would just automatically pass on that just because of the idea that their applications can be rolled back.
Well, one thing is it's a new system. So no matter what, you should still be hesitant to adopt it. Whether or not there are any sort of security issues or whatever else, all that stuff aside, you want to wait for the first couple years before you actually start taking it seriously.
Interesting. Yeah. So, how is I know you guys talked about the death threats, but how has the reception been from various communities so far on your paper?
Yeah. So everyone that's not EOS has been really stoked about our research.
I bet.
Everyone from EOS has been just totally man, it's been crazy.
Has anybody tried to dispute your paper technically, and have you guys been receptive to that?
Yeah, we're receptive to any sort of critique, but a lot of the issues that have come up are one, we don't define a blockchain, or we think that a blockchain is only limited to proof of work or whatever. I think that it just has to do with these are highly technical concepts, and communicating them effectively, it can be confusing, right? We're using a lot of different terms, a lot of big words, a lot of complex and abstract concepts as well. So most of the feedback we've gotten is oh, well, if you guys, why is it 4,000 transactions per second on the mainnet? And I think that was something that we should have illustrated in our research paper. But we're going to actually be live streaming our tests soon. and that'll be the first thing that we address in our live stream. So we'll demonstrate this is the environment in which 4,000 transactions per second was achieved, and these are the effects on throughput as we introduce different conditions to the network. That's interesting.
So your live stream has any, like, where do I go to see EOS's transactions per second? Like, is it on their block explorer?
Or you can go to eosnetworkmonitor.io, and you can see what their all-time high is and what their current throughput is. And right now they're at about, it says 178, 165, 121, and like 4,000. So they're around 100 transactions per second live, and then their all-time high is 3,996. Wow.
So, I want to switch gears to an issue with Ethereum, or it might not be an issue, but I just had Scott Anderson on, a lawyer, former prosecutor, and he basically echoed his thoughts that the SEC with William Hinnam's speech thought that Ethereum was decentralized enough and didn't constitute a security sale. But now we're seeing enforcement actions against ICOs like AirFox and Paragon and Ether Delta settlement. Do you guys think that, there's two questions here. One is great for Ethereum on innovating on a use case ICOs, but the problem is, they may have to refund all ICOs money. But the other argument there is that a lot of the money raised wasn't by US investors. Do you think that EOS will ever, do ICOs? Or I don't know if they have or they haven't. I think they have. But
I hope no one does an ICO ever again. I hope that people start to create products and solutions of value that actually work, and there's no need for an ICO, right?
Yeah, no, that's interesting. Well, Zach, I've had you for the whole time. Nate, Daniel, is there anything you guys wanted to discuss that I might have missed? I know you guys were kind of in the weeds here.
Yeah, Zach does a really good job with this stuff. He's an amazing speaker.
No, he's a great speaker. I'm just wondering, are there any, during your research, are there any key points when you were looking through EOS or when you're writing this paper that you're wow, that we haven't discussed?
Not really. None that I can think of right now. How about you, Daniel?
I think the research paper that we wrote was pretty comprehensive, and I think our wish is for people to actually read it and, not just read these bullet points that these articles say, kind of give the short list of what it actually is. But like Zach said, it's pretty technical, but I think still our wish is for people to really go into it and kind of, pick apart at it and really see what we wrote rather than what other people say that we wrote.
Yeah, right.
That's a good point. People don't like to read anymore, which is the issue, which is why it's great to have you guys on. But, I think that Vitalik kind of discussed cartels in the past, before all of this happened, which is kind of funny. It kind of reminds me of Tezos's white paper, where they kind of saw all the problems with Bitcoin and Ethereum before Ethereum was even around. But that's another issue for another day. And I saw Joe Lubin retweeted your report, so it's obviously getting the press that you guys want. Is there anything that you would change or you guys wish you looked into more? I don't think you guys are missing anything here.
Well, I don't know, man. We worked on this for quite a while.
Yeah. The only thing which because we're totally open, there's only one mistake which I found possible, and that was we just got the epoch wrong. It's actually double what we said, but besides that, everything is accurate. Yeah. So shout out to Thomas Cox for pointing that out. I'd like to thank him for that.
Yeah. Any errors that we made are just really just not very are negligible, right? They're just we made a couple errors that were just pretty basic that didn't really have any effect on our results. So
yeah, no, that's an interesting point. But it just sounds like, to zoom way out, it sounds to me like you guys have discovered or pointed out architectural problems and community problems. And, if you're an investor or a user, you have to think in extremes when you're building on these platforms for hopefully 100 years, right? I don't understand, how do you guys see EOS surviving after you guys have pointed all this out? It seems like it's just a matter of time for the problems to multiply.
Yeah, I think that there's going to be a lot of security issues that are going to arise in the near future. But yeah, I don't think that. I'm not sure. I don't know. I can't objectively say anything like that though.
Yeah,
but I think the people that believe in EOS are going to continue to believe in EOS. But then I don't think there's going to be a major, shift because, even after having this report come out, it's not like any of the block producers left or, all the, like their market cap dropped like 100% or anything. But, I think people are still going to stick with what they believe in.
That's a good point. I mean, well, you guys said that the block producers are making what, like 10,000 a day, I think?
It varies. So, that was another point of contention. It was like, oh, well, we only make 8,000 a day or something. I don't know. I mean, they make a lot. They make a lot more than we're making. I can tell you that much.
Maybe you guys should become a block producer.
All right. Yeah.
But I mean, the 8 or 10 or 12,000 a day, whatever it is, that's way more than an Ethereum or miner at this point.
Yeah, definitely. But I mean, it's a completely different job.
Do you think that it's an issue that so many, there's so many large backers of EOS? I mean, I don't really follow Dan Larimer, but I don't know if is he actually still a voice in the space?
I haven't seen anything coming from him. He's it looks like he kind of like bowed out as soon as EOS was released, like literally like a week after.
Jesus. And I mean, he's had several companies, right? Steemit, this.
Yeah, he had Steemit and then he had BitShares as well. So BitShares is really what the bulk of EOS is based on.
Geez, well, before I let you guys go, I mean, I know you guys are neutral, but you did find serious problems. That's why you're vocal about it, which is what you want in a blockchain community. But is there anything about EOS that you liked?
Yeah. Like I like the WASM. I like the WASM implementation. I like the. I think that's probably about it, actually.
Nate, Daniel, did you guys like anything about the EOS platform?
I thought they did a really good job as far as optimizations in their code. When I looked at it, it looked like they actually spent the time and effort to optimize and make sure everything was efficient. I just wish they would have done it in a more readable way.
Got it. That makes sense. I mean, from my perspective, they did a great job raising money.
Oh, yeah.
That's another thing. Well, guys, it's a pleasure having you on. Is there anything I missed that you want to discuss while I have you that we did not hit on?
No, I don't think so. I think we pretty much covered everything. I mean, I would also welcome any critique or criticism from the community. Like that's real criticism and like real discussion.
Zach, if I could have somebody on the podcast with you from the EOS community, who would you pick?
Probably Dan Larimer. I mean, we got into an argument on Twitter, but it seems like the bulk of the arguments are like, well, Ethereum does this, and it's like, okay, that's not that. Okay, we're talking about EOS here. I don't know why it keeps coming down to Ethereum, And also, for the record, I don't think that the future of blockchain is like any one particular system. I think that there are going to be multiple independent purpose-built systems that are going to be operating in parallel, and they're going to be interoperable with one another.
That's a good point. I mean, but other than EOS, if you had to pick a less decentralized system with higher throughput, are there any other alternatives you would pick? Like, would you go to Neo or is it?
I like Syscoin.
Syscoin. How do you? Is that SYS or is that?
Yeah, SYSCOIN.
I haven't heard of it for some reason. I don't know why. Are they?
I think they're like 101 on CoinMarketCap.
Oh, that'll do it. Right off the top 100. Interesting. Yeah. We'll take a look at that. Well, Zach, Daniel, Nate, it's a pleasure having you on. And for everybody in the show notes, I'm going to link to their report, EOS and Architectural Performance and Economic Analysis. I definitely recommend reading it. If it's too technical, not to skip over your work, guys, but you can go to the analysis sections at the end of each section, which is an easy go-to and read.
All right. Well, thanks a lot for having us on. Appreciate it.
Thanks for listening to the podcast. Please rate and review the podcast to help other people find it, and visit 51pct.io to sign up for our retail offering before prices rise to access our entire library of actionable and extensive crypto research.